NFL free agency is right around the corner, and I'm joined by two very special co-hosts. But today we're going to be going through the top 20 to 25 free agents, giving you reasonable destinations, and of course some reasoning behind it. This is your other reminder to drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it. Starting with Chris Jones, and of course you see in the bottom left of your screen the green box, the blue box, and of course the red box. Of course, each is for the first letter of each of our names. You guys can pick that up at home, unless it is a clean sweep of teams. We're going to be going through one by one of these boxes, talking about which team they're going to go to. Very simple. And Chris Jones, we're going to start off here, and I'm going to say he goes back to the Kansas City Chiefs, whether if it's on a short deal, a longer-term deal. This is a guy that if he didn't say, I want to come back for a three-peat at their championship parade, Amir Bakari, I would have said, hey, this guy is going to the Houston Texans or another team. But Chris Jones, he wants this three-peat. I think he returns, whether if it's on a team-friendly deal or he gets his bag. But Bakari, where do you think he's going?
I agree with you. I think he's going to go back to Kansas City. They made it, the team as well as himself has made it pretty clear that they want to be back with each other. They want to reunite. They've made it clear that Chris Jones is a top priority this offseason on their defense. I think they're going to get a deal done, no matter what it takes.
Yeah, Chris Jones, looking at him, before the season, the whole entire controversy with his contract and stuff, personally, I thought he was bluffing because at the end of the day, it makes no sense for you to leave in the middle of this dynasty. And I think for Chris Jones, he played well enough, this year for him to finally come back to KC. And, if they don't have Chris Jones, that run defense looks completely different. And I think Chris Jones realizes, he's the centerpiece of that defense and the anchor, and he's coming straight back.
Yeah, especially. Yeah, one of their key losses on the season were week 1 against the Detroit Lions. And you could see how dominant the Detroit Lions were from the get-go in that game. They were able to control the line of scrimmage. And, of course, I'm not going to say Chris Jones would have negated that, but he definitely would have helped the Chiefs side of the argument. But Chris Jones, speaking about the NFL Draft Combine, he had one of the legendary Draft Combine moments. We're going to leave it at that. We're going to move over to the quarterback position. Of course, you see in the bottom left. Clean sweep. We all have him going back to Kansas City. Moving over to the quarterback position, though, let's talk about Kirk Cousins. A guy is a free agent. I think he's 36 years old, so he's getting up there, but he still has some good football left in him. We all have him going back to the Minnesota Vikings. And on my part, I'll say I just can't see a guy like him having the number 1 wide receiver in football, having a top 5 tight end at TJ Hawkinson, a solid defense, even though they have some questions there, especially with some key free agents. You have an offensive-minded head coach. The city loves you. I just think Kirk Cousins is going to return and play his last couple years in Minnesota. And, of course, for Minnesota, I think it's good because whether if you get J.J. McCarthy or another young quarterback, Kirk Cousins can teach them. Whether it's Jaron Hall, if you believe in him, he can coach up these whoever the backup may be, and they can take over Minnesota after he hangs it up. But Kirk Cousins, I think, returns and finishes his career in Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like you said, Kirk is 36. He's older. I think this team is in a position right now where, like you said, they're going to lose. They might lose a couple of people on defense, a couple of key pieces on defense. They're going to try and keep this offense, together. They already they just released Alexander Madison, I think, the other day, if I'm not mistaken. So they're going to want to bring their quarterback in. They saw, what the team looked like with him at quarterback last year versus without. And I think when he got hurt, he was really starting to find his groove last year. This is a team, obviously, like you said, arguably a top 3, top 2, top 1 receiver in the league, and Justin Jefferson. They want to keep this duo going. They want to see, how many more productive years can they get out of Kirk. I think, like you mentioned, they can get a couple more years out of him, as well as you still have a timeline to bring in another younger QB and develop him, whether that QB is already on your roster or that's in a draft this year or next. So I think Kirk stays in Minnesota.
Yeah, for me, when I watch Kirk, Kirk is aging like fine wine. And, Kirk Cousins obviously is coming off the injury, but, I think for him, this injury won't hinder him too much because, he's not mobile to begin with. We use that same logic for Aaron Rodgers, and I think it applies for him too. And, I'm looking at Kirk Cousins, and, I think Minnesota's going to do everything they can to bring him back. I think they'll be dumb not to, because at the end of the day, you need a good quarterback to compete. And, if Minnesota has, a solid defense to start the year off, and they don't start off terrible like they did, this Minnesota team, is possibly leading their division, and possibly, making an early playoff push.
Yeah, I think this NFC North is quietly going to be a very, very competitive division next year with Jordan Love coming back for another year. The Bears might have Caleb Williams and Brock Bowers or whoever else they want to pair on that offense. Of course, Detroit made it to the NFC title game. It's going to be a very competitive division, and if Minnesota wants any chance, They got to bring back Kirk Chains. But I also forgot to mention Ty Chandler, of course, had a breakout season, second half of the year. And of course, Jordan Addison, if Puka Nacua didn't have a legendary year, would have been the best receiver in that class. But Kirk Cousins, we have going back to Minnesota. No changes so far, but here's a big change. And of course, this is maybe the most talked about guy this entire offseason. Justin Fields, a guy that has had a up and down career with the Chicago Bears, in all honesty. And I think he's now in a position where, we know the talent's there, but can he put it together, especially in the fourth quarters where he doesn't have the greatest numbers? This is a guy that's going to be on the move this offseason, more likely than not. And I have him going home to the Atlanta Falcons. I think if you go there, you join an exciting young offense with a talented defense. You an offense that has Kyle Pitts. Maybe you can find a dynamic duo there. You still have Bijan Robinson, Drake London. You still have the 8th pick to draft a Dallas Turner or another talented defensive piece. Or maybe you just go get a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options here for Atlanta. It's what we want to see, and I think that's what we're going to get. Justin Fields goes back home to the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I when I was making my predictions, obviously, the first team that came up to mind for me was Atlanta, but I actually went a different route. I said Las Vegas, and I just wanted to give a different scenario here. I think this is a team that once again needs a QB. Aiden O'Connell, he started last year, but I feel like his floor is lower than most than what I guess you could say the starting quarterback level would be. Obviously Justin Fields is better. I think in that head-to-head category. I think if you bring Justin Fields to a team like the Raiders, they have Devontae Adams, they have Hunter Renfrow, we'll see what happens with Josh Jacobs. I think this is a team, they have good weapons that, Luke Getsy is there as well. I think this is a team that, could benefit from having a more developed, a more mature Justin Fields if, Atlanta doesn't happen to, work out.
And, for me, Fields and Russ, in my opinion, I think Fields is going to go to Pittsburgh, which is crazy to sound, but I think between him or Russ, those two are going to go to two of these three destinations. And, for Fields, I'm leaning more towards Pittsburgh. And I think Pittsburgh is a team where, if you even have a slightly better quarterback, you're making a solid run. I think for Mike Tomlin, I think for this offense, for this team, I think, they're more so, fine with going after a younger quarterback and going ahead and just, playing it with Fields. So at the end of the day, Pittsburgh probably doesn't want to pay Russ all that money. And so, I think Pittsburgh's going to go ahead and push for Fields, and Chicago's going to go ahead and get Caleb Williams.
Justin Fields hasn't had the most success as far as the win column here in his NFL career, but there's no doubt he's still one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league. Of course, he just hasn't been in a great situation. No doubt, I think he's going to make any of these teams better, especially at that position. The biggest question for whoever gets him this offseason, though, of course, is he going to be worth that contract that you might have to pay him after next season? Because we've seen quarterbacks like Geno Smith, Amir, we talk about it a lot, where he had a resurgent level year, got a lot of money, and then kind of came back down to earth. I want to ask you guys here, do you think if Justin Fields goes to one of these locations, let's say he has a Pro Bowl level year, do you think he is going to be able to play at that level for his career? Or do you think he's going to kind of tailor off and be more so of a risk here to pay here next offseason?
I think Justin Fields, it's weird because in college, I don't think people ever really doubted his arm talent. And I think it's really just flipped once he's gotten into the league. Obviously, he's a dynamic runner of the football. He's one of the best QB runners ever. But it's sometimes seems like his arm is the reason, he struggles sometimes. So I think if Justin Fields can come back next year, prove that he can throw the football accurately and really drop pinpoint passes and just play really good next year with his arm as well as his legs, I think he can sustain that his entire career. You obviously, like I mentioned, one of the best QB runners of the football. If he could just come back and be better with passing, we've seen guys get better in their accuracy over their careers and over since the time they've been in the league. Like you look at Lamar, he's a lot better than he was. I think Justin Fields is on that same trajectory. So I see we were doubting right there, but I think Justin Fields, if he can get it together, he can sustain.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I'm not really sure. I think with Justin Fields, up to this point, we've kind of seen flashes of him play good once his team around him plays better. And I think around him, around his team, if they can play better to help him, elevate, I think he has a chance to. But, the biggest concern that I have is, a lot of times when quarterbacks first come into the league, their confidence is kind of destroyed because they're in bad situations. It's kind of hard to come back from that, kind of hard to sustain, a long, successful career after that. So I think with Justin Fields is kind of a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. But then we move over to Russell Wilson, and for a lot of the same reasons you pointed out, Amir, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm going to have here for Russell Wilson, of course, a guy that was a quarterback of a dominant early 2010s team, of course, with the Legion of Boom there in Seattle. There was a lot of questions after the defense kind of dwindled down. Is he a franchise quarterback? Can you really win at the highest level with a guy like Russell Wilson? He was sick of the noise, and he ended up getting his way out. He ended up getting traded to the Denver Broncos, and it has been anything but good for Russell Wilson in his 2 years there. So much so that the Denver Broncos decided that they would rather eat up $85 million in cap than pay and play Russell Wilson. But hey, he's on to a new chapter in his football career, and I think going to a veteran situation and a veteran team like the Pittsburgh Steelers that have maybe the most player-friendly head coach in the league, and Mike Tomlin, I think is a perfect scenario. He goes to a team that is ready to win now in a competitive division that has a great defense. Of course, when fully healthy, I think, you get Russell Wilson next to Deontay Johnson if they decide to resign him, or George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. I think he's in a great situation there to be the veteran for this team to win at the highest level, because I'm not sure that Pittsburgh is sold on Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, and just like the reason you had Justin Fields going to Atlanta, I'm actually going to put Russ in Atlanta. I think Russ is obviously he's a veteran QB. He's done it at the highest level. And I think when you have a younger team around the quarterback, that calming presence at QB can really help influence the way the team plays. I think Russ is going to go into the next, whatever team he goes to next, he's going to go there with a point to prove. He'll have plenty of weapons to obviously execute his desires of winning another ring. Morris is a rookie head coach. He's going to be more focused on the defense, obviously coming from the Rams, being the defensive coordinator there. But I really think that if you get a rookie head coach, a veteran QB, especially a rookie defensive minded head coach, he won't have to worry about the offense as much. They can get a little bit more creative in what they do. This is obviously, like I said, somebody who's been there, done that. I think this will really help a younger team like the Falcons on offense.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go the opposite of Owen as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go Russ to Atlanta. I think for, this Atlanta team, the biggest knock on them this past season is one quarterback with two, a veteran presence. Going into this year, that offense needs a veteran leader. They need somebody to kind of command and take control. And that's what they were missing. Guys like Ritter, who sort of kind of hindered this team's development because, he was young and developing himself. I think going into this year, you got Bijan, who's going to be year 2. You got Drake London, who's also up and coming. And you also got Kyle Pitts, who's been missing the quarterback that can get him the ball. And I think Atlanta's a perfect situation for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyle Pitts definitely still, I could argue he has the most potential at the tight end position in the league, and he just is underutilized. And it's really a shame. Go Gators, right?
Yeah.
But moving over to the defensive side of the ball, and you see on the top right of this left side of the screen where the tag mark is there. And of course, very simply put, these players are players that, whether if they want to leave or not, they can. The team that they're currently on could just say, "Hey, you're coming back next year, and we're going to pay you a 1-year deal to play one more season." Brian Burns is one of the most talented and underrated edges in the league, and he, of course, is also a franchise tag available player. I think Carolina doesn't mess around. I know they haven't been successful in a long time, really since they've gotten Brian Burns, but he's one of the most talented, and you can't leave a guy like this just go. So why not? Bring Brian Burns back and try and prove to him, or maybe try and have some success next year to convince him to stay long term, because he's one of them ones, and I think he returns to Carolina on the franchise tag. But Bakari, where do you have Brian Burns going?
I have Brian Burns. If he just doesn't happen to find his way to Carolina, if they don't decide to use that tag on him, I believe that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should look into him a lot. I think this is a team that they're going to need some linebacker depth. I think that this is probably what their top 3 to look forward to into free agency for them. I think Brian Burns, if he hits that open market, you go leap on him. You go give him that chance.
Everybody.
He's going to be playing a division rival. So that'll be a little crazy for him. But I really think Brian Burns could really bolster this Tampa Bay defense. Obviously, they have 2 other starting linebackers hitting free agency. 2, and then obviously they let go of 1. So Brian Burns, I think Tampa Bay would be a great fit for him if he doesn't find his way back to Carolina.
Yeah, filling that Shaq Barrett void. Of course, they just released him, like you mentioned. But Amir, where do you have him going? Do you have him go to a different location in a different scenario, or staying with that franchise tag?
So I have Brian Burns staying in Carolina, and all the points that you mentioned. This guy's too good for Carolina to just let go. And, a team that's already struggling, a team that's looking in the future. A team that's trying to build this defense up, and sort of build this team around Bryce Young. It would make absolutely no sense to make a guy like this go. It would make no sense.
Absolutely. Moving over to another edge here, and of course, he's also a franchise eligible player in Josh Allen. Of course, not the quarterback, a guy that looks completely different, but he's also dominant at his own position in his own right. Of course, he plays in Jacksonville, and this is a guy that year after year, double-digit sacks, and he has an immediate impact on that defensive line. And hey, he was supposed to have some help these last 2 years from Trayvon Walker. He hasn't really had that, in all honesty. But Josh Allen is still one of the most talented edges in the league, and we all have him going back to Jacksonville. Bakari, any additional thoughts?
Oh, obviously, like Brian Burns was, for you two previously. Josh Allen's somebody too good to leave out on the market, too good to have on a different team. You bring him back no matter the cost.
Yeah. Amir?
Same exact reason why, Jacksonville has to pay this dude. They have to. If they let him walk and leave, this team is already sort of, falling apart and have a lot of dysfunction going on. If they let him leave, it's all over.
Yeah, I think we're talking about another Jacksonville wide receiver here in just a little bit, or not another, but you guys get the point. Hey, it's a big offseason for Jacksonville, in my opinion. Another edge here that one is not on a tag, so we really can have him anywhere. And spoiler alert, we have him going to 3 different places. So let's talk about it here. Washington Commanders, I have making a splash to pair next to John Allen and Daron Payne there on that defensive line. Of course, they had Montez Sweat and Chase Young last year. They got rid of both of them. Now this year, they have a chance to re-bolster up this defensive line, especially on the edge. I think Daniel Hunter's always been a guy that has been about his money there in Minnesota. I just don't know if Minnesota wants to pay him that money, especially with their draft position. They can always go get a Jared Verse, who's a dominant edge out of Florida State, or another talented rookie, of course. Maybe a Latu, my favorite edge in the draft class, excuse me. But I think, Washington just has the money to give him, and Daniel Hunter's always been about his bag, so he's going to Washington here to get one final big contract in his career.
And I had him going to Buffalo. I think he could really help this Buffalo defense, who's obviously every time they've hit the playoffs, it seems like they've struggled or just haven't been able to get past that hump of Patrick Mahomes, which, to their fault, or, a lot of teams haven't done that. But I really think if he goes yeah, exactly. All but one. Right, Owen, go Joe Burrow. No,
Hey, Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow has beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, and I mean, hey, he's gotten out of the AFC. I don't know if Josh Allen has done that, but Bakari, continue here, please.
Yeah, like I was saying, I think if you give him a chance to go to Buffalo, Von Miller past his prime, I think we can agree on that.
Yes.
So far. They have other free agents hitting the market as well. You bring him in, obviously after the year he had, I really think he could be a difference maker when you really need him to step up in the playoffs. And obviously the way the chips fall, they're going to end up playing the Chiefs again for how many years in a row this upcoming year? It'll happen. Trust me. Script writers will make it happen. So
it'll be in the second round of the playoffs, though, because Joe Burrow is going to make it to the AFC title game and probably go to the Super Bowl. If Deshaun Watson decides to actually play football, the Browns will be in that spot, of course. But Amir, go ahead and finish this off. Where do you have Daniel Hunter going?
It's, like what was just mentioned, Daniel Hunter is a guy who throughout the course of his career, he always wanted money and wanted to win. And so I think the perfect spot for him will be Detroit. And, I was leaning towards Buffalo, but the biggest problem with Buffalo is they're literally dead last in cap, if I'm not mistaken. Like, they are so far in the negatives. And, Buffalo is already struggling to kind of pay their players and figure out what they're going to do. And so I think for Daniel Hunter, he's looking at another team in the NFC, a team that just went to the NFC Championship, and also a team that's going to be targeting another edge rusher to help out Hutch. And so I think for this Lions team, they're going to push towards him. I think Daniel Hunter's going to go to Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it would be dominant. It's just I'm not sure how often we see players just go. I mean, I don't know. Does Daniel Hunter hate Minnesota? Maybe he does. If he does, Detroit would be a perfect fit because he could just terrorize them 2 times a year, of course. But when we go over here to Justin Madubuike, of course, guy who broke out onto the scene last year, Pro Bowl year. And of course, he was a huge part of this dominant Ravens defense. Look, he's a franchise tag level player. The Ravens just made it to the second round of the playoffs. Of course, they could have made it farther, or no, excuse me, the AFC title game. They could have made it, to the AFC championship game. But I think they're in a position now where they have the roster to compete and they can't mess around, especially because, John Harbaugh wants to compete with his brother now in LA. You got to bring him back. However, in a different scenario, I'm going to have the Chicago Bears with the money that they have going after a guy like this and just offering him too much money to refuse, especially if Baltimore decides to go a different route.
Yeah, I see where you're going from. Like you said, if he was to look somewhere else, I think that would be a good spot for him. But for me, like you mentioned before, I think the Ravens are in this position where they have to bring him back no matter the cost. Like you said, they are in a position to compete. If Lamar knew how to run the football, all of a sudden he just didn't want to do that. If Lamar knew how to read open running lanes in the passing game, maybe that Chiefs game is a little bit different. But regardless, they had a very dominant defense. It almost looked like the Browns' historic defense. No, I'm playing. I don't know what I'm talking about.
CJ Stroud.
But I think you bring them back. Mattabees, isn't that what they called them, or something like that? Mattabees, bring them back.
Yeah, this Ravens team has to bring this guy back. I mean, this Ravens defense was, one of the best Ravens defenses we've seen in the past 20 years. And I think, a guy that had 13 sacks this past year, that sort of up front was, probably like the leader of this up front, defense and, stopping that run game. I think Baltimore has to bring this guy back. They have to.
I can't believe we've gotten this far into the episode. And if you're still listening, of course, let me mention this. We're recording this on Tuesday before the 4 o'clock franchise tag deadline, which is when we would know the outcome of these players. Who knows? Maybe I'll just update or upload this a little bit early. But if you're curious, if Justin Madubuike is on the Chiefs, as well as Josh Allen, Brian Burns, and everybody else, if they just end up on the Chiefs, of course, we didn't know that before recording today's video. But moving over to the running back position, there's a loaded running back class in this free agency, and Derrick Henry is one of them. This is a guy that has been a for-lifer in Tennessee through the ups, the downs, mostly downs, but you guys get the picture. He had a rough start to his career, but when he came onto the scene, Derrick Henry was crowned the king for a reason. I think he still has a lot left in the tank. Of course, it's the first time he's ever hit free agency, and I think a team that needs a dominant running back in a run-heavy scheme that is at a high level, that's going to compete for a Super Bowl, this is just the perfect match made in heaven. I have him go to the Baltimore Ravens just because it checks all the boxes for Derrick Henry at this point in his career.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are up for contract. So, I think this is Derrick Henry is where you go with this. Obviously, like you said, the scheme, everything that goes with it, it just suits Derrick Henry. I think if you bring Derrick Henry here, it'll unlock another level to Lamar's offense. The ground and power runner that Derrick Henry is, like you mentioned, I think he has a little bit left in the tank as well. You saw the situation he was in last year with Tennessee. You bring him into a winning situation this year. That Super Bowl itch really gets some of these players really to just get to another level or, kind of rejuvenate themselves. And I think that'll happen for Derrick Henry. He'll probably walk in the building, sense how close they are to the ring, and really just turn it up to another gear.
So I believe all the rumors are going to finally come true. I believe Baltimore makes the most sense for Derrick Henry, despite him still having a lot left in the tank. I mean, you kind of saw this past season, he took, a slight step back because, he's 30 years old, with his running style, the way he runs, I think he's looking at Baltimore this past year, seeing Gus rush for 13 touchdowns and have a breakout year behind that offensive line. And so for him, he's kind of like, I might as well go ahead and go to Baltimore. I'm willing to take a pay cut. I'm going to go ahead and end my career the right way and possibly win a championship.
Yeah, absolutely. If he does or not, his name will be in Canton, of course, here in about a decade. But moving over to another running back, and we just got some news right before we restarted to record. And again, let me re-preface by saying we are recording this on Tuesday. It is currently 11:11. Once you look at that, that's actually kind of crazy, the luck. But Tuesday we're recording this, and we just got news that Saquon will not be tagged by New York. That is one of two options left for Saquon Barkley. Either one, he can go and, now he can explore free agency. And of course, he doesn't have to worry about being tagged by New York. Or two, that could just mean that him and New York are working out a longer-term contract. Whatever the case is, Saquon's about to get paid, and I have him going to Houston to join C.J. Stroud. Of course, that's been the popular rumor, and I just think it is fun. Of course, you saw C.J. Stroud dominate last year. Saquon wants to be in a winning position and on a winning team. He checks all the boxes in Houston, and I want to see that happen.
Yeah, I originally when I was thinking about where Saquon could go, that was my first thought. Of course, was just go to Houston with Saquon. That would be a crazy duo. But then I thought about it a little bit, and I was like, if he does stay, it makes a lot of sense. I said it makes a lot of sense for him to stay or it'll make a lot of sense for him to stay. Whether the Giants realize it now or if he leaves and they realize it in the middle of the season. If the Giants go ahead and draft a QB or take somebody, or Daniel Jones comes back, they'll see they need a running attack either way. I think Saquon gives them that. Obviously, they don't. It's not like they're running out there with a crazy high powered offense. I think you got to take what you can get. And especially if you're going to have a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback out there, having a rushing attack, having a consistent rushing attack, or at least a rushing threat like Saquon really benefits that development, or it takes a little bit off of what you're asking your young quarterback to do, if that's the direction they choose to go in.
Yeah, in my opinion, Saquon, it would make sense for the Giants to bring him back. But for him, I don't think he wants to stay in New York, to be honest. And, the Giants have kind of failed to sort of give him a good protection, give him a good O-line to run behind. And I think for him, obviously he wants to win. I mean, he spent his whole entire career being a part of this losing team, and he wants to get paid and win. I think there's no better place than to go to Houston.
Yeah, especially if it fits the timeline and everything. So it's a match made in heaven, and that means it's not going to happen because that is what happens in the NFL. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball yet again, we're going to talk about a guy that's talking about a breakout season. This guy has made himself a household name and maybe a top 10 cornerback. I'd say that's pretty safe to say. And Jaylen Johnson, a guy that had a breakout year, of course, Pro Bowl level year. And he's going to be the #1 cornerback for Chicago for the next 10 years, in my opinion. And of course, all three of us agree he is returning to the Chicago Bears. Any additional thoughts here, Bakari, before we move on?
Not at all. I think your defense played absolutely insane second half of the season last year. You want to keep that momentum going, especially if you're going to have a rookie quarterback on the offensive side of the football. You want one thing consistent, and that's a dominating defense.
And so for me, looking at Jaylen Johnson this past year, in my honest opinion, I thought he had a top 3 cornerback season this past year. And, a sleeper team that I think is really going to push towards signing him is going to be Philly. Philly, is a team surprisingly. They have around, I want to say 30 million cap. And so I think for Philly, they still have somewhat of a competing roster around him. And so I think that's the team that's going to, offer him money and push towards him. But I believe Chicago is going to offer him a bag. He's going to stay.
No, I think honestly, if he wanted to, switch conferences, I think the perfect team for him would be the Cleveland Browns. Moving over to Antoine Winfield, a guy that, of course, is up for a franchise tag, but honestly, the best player on this Tampa Bay defense. Of course, he's in the running with guys like Vita Vea, Levante David, of course, and of course Jamel Dean. But Antoine Winfield, not Ford. Antoine Winfield had a breakout year last year, Pro Bowl level year yet again. I sound like a broken record, but he's just too good of a player, just like the players that we mentioned before, like Brian Burns and Josh Allen, for teams to let go. So Antoine Winfield is one of those safeties. He's one of them ones. He's going to return to Tampa here in 2024.
Yeah, he should come to Cleveland.
Yeah, no, I honestly agree. I think we have a hole at safety, and Grant Delpit's okay, but I'd rather prefer Antoine Winfield. Amir, your thoughts about Antoine?
Yes, Antoine, he played way too good for, the Bucs to let him go. And, a team that's already sort of, having secondary struggles throughout the year, defensive struggles. And, you look at the Bucs this past playoffs run, the only reason why they were even able to get stops is because they had to send pressure every play, because the secondary was struggling so bad. And I think this team has to pay him. He's earned the extension, earned the money. And I think, them letting him walk would be a huge mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving over to Michael Pittman, we can make this one quick because I think we all have the same idea. Maybe I could speak for all of you guys here. Michael Pittman, he seems like an Indianapolis for lifer. There's been no signs of frustration with him in the franchise. It seems like they're willing to pay him, and handsomely. And of course, you have a young, promising quarterback coming back in Anthony Richardson. You still have an okay defense. Anthony Richardson's top 10 in the league. Don't disrespect him. But Michael Pittman, of course, if he doesn't want to go to Indy, a team that needs a #1 wide receiver is the Cleveland Browns. So, hey, he can come over to Cleveland as well. But Bakari, Amir, either of you guys have an opinion on Michael Pittman here?
I agree with you. They need him for AR's development.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not much. I would have said they would have tagged him, but it's kind of getting close to that time where the deadline's going to be over. But, I think for him, if they don't end up tagging him, they're going to pay him. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a long-term deal here with Michael Pittman, especially after the breakout level year, or at least career level year he had last year. Moving over to Calvin Ridley, an interesting receiver also in the AFC South. And this is a guy that this was my biggest miss last year. Of course, you could say that Joe Burrow going to the Super Bowl and winning that for the Bengals was my biggest miss, but injuries happen, so I'm not going to count that too big of a miss. But however, the biggest miss I had, I did a top 10 predictions video for hot takes going into the year. Calvin Ridley, I said, was going to be an all-pro wide receiver. He was anything but that. He did have 1,000 yards, but it didn't seem like it at all. It seemed like he had 2 or 3 good games, and then he disappeared for the next 13. Calvin Ridley was just very underwhelming, and I understand he was off of football for a year, but he just didn't look like his former self, even in those games that he was hot. So Calvin Ridley, I'm going to have him going to the Kansas City Chiefs because, hey, the receivers that underperform, they fit perfectly in Kansas City. Michael MVS, Kadarius Toney. If you have a receiver that underperforms, I think they fit perfectly with Patrick Mahomes. So he goes there, gives them a number one, and it could be a short-term deal, maybe like a 1-year deal, and he can have a duo there with a guy like Rashee Rice, and maybe they draft a guy like A.D. Mitchell or an Xavier Worthy for the future. But Calvin Ridley to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I was going to have him go to the Chiefs, but I'm tired of the Chiefs, man. I had him going back to Jacksonville on a prove-it deal. Obviously, like you mentioned, he had 1,000 yards. It didn't really seem like it, but he was off of football because he couldn't control his gambling. I think if you give him another year to, kind of see what he can do, a year removed or 2 years removed from being off for a year, maybe he'll come back with a little bit of juice, like I said, on a prove-it deal. It's crazy. He had 1,000 yards, but he had 9 games under 40 yards receiving. That's absolutely insane. If he was going to be your number one receiver, but like I said, I'm not going to put him on the Chiefs because I don't want to see them. I don't want Pat Mahomes to gain more. So
Right.
Yeah, come back to Jacksonville on a prove it deal. And I'm straight hating too. I don't care.
Calvin Ridley, is a guy who should be a number one receiver, but he had the channels inner Michael Jordan and gamble, and get suspended for a year. And, like Owen just mentioned, there is no better place for underwhelming receivers whose value just went down to go to KC. I think he's going straight to Kansas City. I believe that, since his value went down, since, the money's going to be paid went down, KC can honestly, make him take a pay cut and bring him in and win.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting older, so those prove-it deals, whether if it's in Jacksonville or Kansas City like we have here, this is a guy that next year has to be huge because if he wants one big payday, he's going to have to play really good next year and then get that big deal before he retires because Calvin Ridley, as of right now, doesn't look like he's going to get that big payday. But Kansas City, Jacksonville, Calvin Ridley, if you don't want to go there, Cleveland needs a number one wide receiver, and I'll never talk bad about him ever again, except that he went to Bama, right? That's of course always a red flag. Moving over to Marquise Brown, Hollywood Marquise Brown. There's been rumors that he might go back and reunite with Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, but
No, please.
I'm sorry?
No, please.
But as a collective, we have Hollywood Brown staying and getting paid in Arizona. I'm not sure the extent that you guys believe he will, but I do think he's going to get a 3-year deal or so to get the rest of his prime there in Arizona. Him and Kyler Murray did have a good connection second half of the year. I mean, hey, can you guys imagine a wide receiver core or an offense? Kyler Murray's coming back. He played really good second half of the year. You're going to have whoever running back doesn't matter. But you're going to have Trey McBride, who's going to have a Pro Bowl level year. I think next year's a breakout year. And then you're going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Marquise Brown as your wide receivers. And then Michael Wilson, who's solid in his own right. I think this offense can be sneakily really good next year. And it all starts with getting Marquise Brown back in the red and white.
Yeah, that was kind of my reasoning behind it too. Was all predicated on them getting Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of having a crazy receiving core, kind of like you have an insane prospect in Marvin Harrison, and you have a speedster in Hollywood. Obviously, I think that it makes a lot of sense for him to come on back to Arizona, build on what they had second half of the year, especially once Kyler got back, because I feel like that's when they were really able to tell what their moving pieces were going to really look like. But yeah, I agree with you. If he doesn't want to go to Arizona, I know there's a team that plays downtown Cleveland, First Energy Stadium. I think
No.
I think that would be a good fit because he'd come in and be the second best receiver we have.
You guys see the best quarterback in the league right here?
Okay, man.
This is like scale to size. This is
I don't see Brock Purdy.
Okay. Amir, your thoughts about Marquise Brown being a Cleveland Brown? I mean, Arizona Cardinal.
Marquise Brown is interesting because, in my opinion, I thought he's been underwhelming these past couple of years. And, I think, for him, even if he was to go anywhere else, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to offer much money. And so I think, Kyler gave, this Cardinals team sort of a breath of life, kind of gave these players hope. And I believe Hollywood Brown's going to come back and, trust the process in this Arizona team.
I think, I mean, at the end of the day, if he gets a 3-year deal, that's plenty of time for them to get the rest of his prime. And then when his contract is up, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have to get paid. So I think it just kind of works out perfectly right now. But moving over to the defensive side of the ball, Christian Wilkins, a guy that is a franchise tag level player. And the Dolphins did say most likely they're not going to tag him. However, we've seen teams in all sports go against their word. Kind of first thing that comes to mind is Blake Griffin, right? When he signed that big contract for LA and then got shipped to Detroit to die, right? But we see it all the time where teams don't always keep their word. Christian Wilkins, very solid interior defensive lineman. And I think he's going to stay in Miami. Of course, they're a team that's right there. They just need a quarterback, or at least just to win at the biggest level. And I think that's, he stays, and he's the piece in this front seven.
Yeah, I had him going to Chicago. I think, if you bring him into an already dominant defense, I think they'd be really dangerous next year. Obviously, we don't know what the quarterback situation is going to look like on offense, But, for the sake of argument, let's just say they kept Justin Fields and they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. or something like that. They had DJ Moore, Marvin Harrison Jr., Darnell Mooney, and then you already had an elite defense, especially, like I said, second half of that year. I think you build on what you had last year on that same offense, adding a piece as well, but then you also add another piece on defense that will really just, I think, put you over the top. You bring back Jaylen Johnson, the trade for Montez Sweat, for Montez Sweat. It really looked great. I think this would be, very. They probably rival the Ravens defense from last year, if not better, if this was to come true.
Before you go, Amir, I just want to say that you're about to take the words out of Bakari and I's mouth. Pause, of course, but. Go ahead, Amir. Where do you think Christian Wilkins is going to go here in 2024?
I think how everything's set up, I believe this team is going to get rid of, their other edge rusher. And I think they're going to go after the interior D lineman and Christian Wilkins. And that's the Cleveland Browns. I think, the Browns.
Yeah, let's go.
And, I think the Browns are finally going to address that interior D lineman issue that they've sort of been dealing with the past couple of years. And, that's really what they're missing. Everything else is kind of taken care of. I believe if they don't end up signing one of these receivers, they're going to go after a guy like Christian Wilkins and pay him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, him next to Dalvin Tomlinson, is there any space for the front four offensive linemen? both those guys would be double team headaches. But if we have the money, Christian Wilkins, actually, we joke around, but this would be a huge addition for us up front. Going over to maybe one of my favorite running backs in the league, and Josh Jacobs. I think he's very underappreciated. But Josh Jacobs, of course, had a down year after a career year in Las Vegas. But I think he stays. He's a franchise tag player. I don't know if he gets franchise tagged. I think they probably bring him back on like a 2-year, $16 million deal, right? Something small, but he's going to be happy because it's $16 million. But I think, he's in the prime of his career. There's a new aura around the Las Vegas Raiders right now with Antonio Pierce as the coach. I think he buys in and he comes back to play with this offense with Devontae Adams.
Yeah, it makes sense, but guess what? He had career lows. I think he's going to go to the Rams. I think the Rams will be looking to add a rushing attack. Obviously, last year, I don't think they expected to be. I don't think they expected to be as good as they were. Or I'm sorry, the Chargers. I don't know why I said the Rams. I'm looking right at the Chargers. I'm trust me, that's exactly what I'm looking at. But I said Rams. Chargers. Excuse my French. I think, obviously the coaching change, we know how he loves to run the ball. We know how he wants a traditional power back. I don't think Austin Eckler is coming back. I believe Chargers are a great fit for Josh Jacobs. He's going to play for a division rival, help Justin Herbert out. Obviously you don't get the same thing you had in the passing game with Josh Jacobs, but I believe the overall rushing and ground attack will be good for this offense for the Chargers.
And I'm going on the same train here. I think Josh Jacobs is going to go to the Chargers. I think that Chargers team right now is ready to move off from Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler going into his 8th season. He's sort of kind of declined this past year, and I believe Harbaugh coming in, it being a fresh face. Josh Jacobs was looking at this team in his division, sort of playing against them and understanding that this team is a couple pieces away from really doing some damage. And I believe he's going to go there. They're going to go ahead and be a run-heavy offense and incorporate him in it. I think they're going to pay him.
Yeah, I honestly, I think he's very underrated in the pass game. To your point, Bakari, even though the volume is not there, I think if you add him in an offense with Justin Herbert, to you guys' point, he would be more of a receiver, and I think we get to see the full package pause of Josh Jacobs going forward. However, I will say I'm more so on the train that the Chargers, it just makes too much sense. They're going to draft Joe Alt at 5. You have a dominant O-line with Justin Herbert. You need a running back, and what running back played for your new head coach, Blake Corum? So I think Blake Corum's probably going to be a Charger in 2024. But again, Josh Jacobs would definitely be an upgrade, at least in year one. Regardless, if he doesn't want to go there, Cleveland is always open. Josh Jacobs, of course. You could battle with Nick Chubb. That wouldn't be much of a battle, though. CJ Gardner Johnson, the most questionable picture I could have chosen here. I chose because that kind of represents CJ Gardner Johnson. But he's a free agent. Of course, he took a team-friendly deal this past offseason to join Detroit. And he wants his money. This is a guy that played some of his best football this past year. I doubt he goes to another contender and takes a team-friendly deal 2 years in a row. He's talented enough to get a deal because he can play safety or he could play outside corner. I think he goes to the Houston Texans because they have money, they can win, and they're young and fun. CJ Gardner can go there and be that voice for that defense next to DeMeco Ryans.
Yeah, I have him going back to the Eagles. He needs to come back and save them. James Bradbury, I will never understand why they chose him over CJ. Darius Slay is washed, and obviously Kevin Byard isn't even on the team anymore. He just got cut yesterday, I think. So whatever. But I think he's going to come back. And really just the defense. The Eagles had a lot of different struggles last year. It seemed like they had I don't know, just overall dysfunction. I believe if you take steps towards getting each and every one of those dysfunctional things figured out, they can be right back on track to where they were in that Super Bowl year, and bringing back a member of that team would be beneficial for them, especially because it'd be an overall upgrade of what they have already. Like you said, he's coming off a career year. I think it makes sense for him to go back to the Eagles.
I think Detroit's going to bring him back. I believe CJ, seeing Detroit sort of win these games, even when he was out, even when he was hurt, I believe, it wouldn't make any sense for him to leave. I understand he wants his money, he wants to get paid and everything like that. But if I'm him, I'm running it back. I mean, you guys made it to the NFC Championship, and a team that's, in my opinion, that had one of the biggest, secondary struggles, the whole entire year. The whole entire, discussion every year was the corner play for Detroit going into every single game. And I think if he plays the whole entire season with this team is even better on defense. And so I think he comes back to Detroit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All three very good fits. But basically, hey, CJ wants his money and he wants to win. He can do that in all three places here. Tyron Smith, we can kind of run through this one. Of course, I didn't go one by one. All three of these teams need protection. For me, Joe Burrow, of course, the most sacked quarterback in his time in the league. The 2 years that Joe Burrow's been healthy for the full season, he's been to the AFC title game and the Super Bowl. Something Josh Allen has never done. But the 2 years that he hasn't been healthy, it's been because of brutal knee injuries, because his offensive lineman can't block, and he's just been beat up all year. When you have a guy that special, whether it's Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, you got to protect those guys. So to do that, you bring in Tyron Smith for 1 year. Of course, Jonah Williams is a free agent, so it's a perfect replace. Bring in Tyron Smith for 1 year. It's a perfect fit because Tyron Smith can come here and compete. But Bakari, you haven't gone to Washington out of all places. Why so?
I believe that, Washington's going to obviously, I think they're going to get a quarterback, and I think whoever you get, they're going to need protection. Washington's line, obviously, it wasn't good last year. We saw with Sam Howell back there, and Jacoby Brissett ended up coming in end of the year, but their overall protection wasn't bad. I think you take steps towards figuring that out. They've been doing the right thing. I think you go ahead, get Tyron Smith for a rookie quarterback, and see where he goes from there.
And, for me, I got to go into KC just for the simple fact that, besides the drops, the biggest struggle for KC this past year has been a tackle play. And, Tyron Smith, at this point in his career, is on his last leg. And so it would make sense for him to go ahead and sign to KC for a 1 year deal, 2 year deal, and go ahead and just end out on a good note. I believe for him, he's not really chasing money. He's chasing, to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these places, well, maybe not Washington this year, but he can win. But regardless, I think if Washington gets him, they're going to pay him a pretty penny, and I'm sure he'll be happy either way with that extra money. Moving over to Gabe Davis, the final receiver we'll talk about today, a guy that has been in Buffalo for a long time, and he's been very up and down. He's another one of those receivers I can see going to Kansas City because he's been so inconsistent. But I think going to a team like Carolina, where one, he can get paid. A guy that has been in Stephon Diggs' shadow, he can go and get paid, be their number one wide receiver next to Adam Thielen. And hey, if Bryce Young comes back and plays, like he should in that second year breakout, like we typically like to see in young quarterbacks, this offense can be fun next year. I'm not going to say they're going to win, but they can be fun, and they can win more than 2 games that they did this year. Gabe Davis gives them a number one wide receiver, and he gets paid.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to the Panthers as well. Like you said, he gets paid, and he gets that chance to step up and you see what he can bring to the plate as the number one receiver, or at least challenge that spot. Maybe they don't win. Maybe instead of 2 games, they win 3 next year. So, so I think the Panthers would be a good spot for him.
I got him going back to Buffalo. This is kind of weird. I believe he's somebody who, hasn't really earned, a major extension just yet. And, it's kind of interesting with certain players because, you really don't realize their motives or know their motives. I'm not sure if he wants to chase money or if he wants to chase winning. But personally, I think it would make sense for him to go back to Buffalo, just continue to chase win and build a legacy. I think, if he goes back to Buffalo for a year or two, plays good, maybe Diggs gets traded or ends up leaving, he kind of builds value to eventually, get paid even more money.
Yeah, and this is a player that I would say, hey, come to Cleveland, but I'm not even going to joke about that. I don't want him in Cleveland. So stay far away. Go stay in Buffalo, right? We'll have Martin Emerson on you on an island. The last player that we want to dive in depth into is Chase Young, a guy that, again, former number 2 overall pick, a guy that was once viewed for the Commanders or the football team at the time to take over and be their guy on that defensive line. Since that point, Daron Payne looked better than he did. Montez Sweat in times looked better than he did. And, of course, Jonathan Allen looked better than he did. So he was actually the weak link on that defensive line. And, of course, he also battled some injuries. He found his way in San Fran after being released, and he made it to the Super Bowl. However, he was really benched, and he didn't really play in the Super Bowl because of how poor his effort was. I think as of right now, I could see him going one of 2 places, either to, the Baltimore Ravens, where I think they have money and maybe they take a shot on him, right? Especially with the defense they have over there. They can kind of, cover his weaknesses, kind of like a small point guard in basketball. But I also have him going to the San Francisco 49ers. You're in a winning situation, and you didn't really earn a big contract from any other team. So unless someone's going to overpay you, stay in a winning situation.
Yeah, that's what I had. I had him coming back on a prove it deal, prove his worth in a winning situation, and see what you can get next year. Maybe for him, I think every player believes they can do better than what they were, especially after a down year, especially after like you said, what happened second half of the season and deep into the playoffs. So he comes back on a prove it deal, and see what he can get next offseason.
Yeah, the same exact reason that Owen mentioned. Chase Young, a guy, who obviously made the Super Bowl, but I mean, to be honest, in the playoffs, he did not play good at all. He played terrible, and so for him, I mean, there's really no teams that's going to pay him, no 3-year, no 4-year contract because he hasn't earned it. He hasn't shown anything, and so I believe he stays in San Fran. He pretty much proves his worth to the league, and he balls out this year.
Yeah, so I said there was 2 teams I could see him going to, the Ravens and that. I take that back. A team that he can go to where he went to college with, he can go to the Browns. It's not too far from OSU. He can take over for Darius Smith. We can get him on a prove-it deal. The Browns need some help up front, and we need to figure out what we're doing with Zadarius Smith. I wouldn't mind, that fit there. But let's talk about some other guys, some honorable mentions. Of course, Amari Cooper, we can start with here at the bottom. I have an asterisk next to his name because I think there's no doubt he's coming back to the Cleveland Browns. I think we can agree. But some running backs here, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler, and J.K. Dobbins. Do you guys have a prediction for any of them, or do you think that they can provide value for another team? And I'll throw this out there, maybe for you guys to talk about. I think Austin Eckler could be a perfect fit in Kevin Stefanski's offense as the number 2 to Nick Chubb.
Personally, the running backs are kind of tricky, based off the market right now and how everything's going, I'm not really sure if these guys are going to chase after money, because I mean, running backs are not getting paid, but Austin Eckler and Cleveland really would be a solid fit. And
Deshaun knew how to throw the ball over 3 yards.
Yeah, I think Kareem Hunt is gone. I think he's out of there. I think he, didn't play good enough to get paid again.
Kansas City.
And so I think Austin Eckler, coming to Cleveland will be perfect. That would now be, the new 2021 version of Kareem and Chubb.
Yeah, absolutely. I want you guys' opinion on this. Bakari, I'll go to you first. We are not the biggest Odell Beckham fans. However, he did have one of the most iconic moments of our childhood here with that, of course, patented one-handed catch. Where do you think Odell Beckham goes in 2024? It doesn't look like he's going to be back in Baltimore, but do you think he kind of goes back home to New York, one of those teams, or do you think he decides to hang it up?
I think Odell is gonna play another year, and maybe another couple of years. I believe. I think he wants to get to another Super Bowl, and I think his motivation is winning. I think for him, he believes that maybe if he can get another Super Bowl or so, it would kind of replace what the injuries took away from him in his prime. Odell, he's openly said how close he was to going to New York. With all this stuff coming out in New York, I don't know if he goes there. But, now this is somebody I believe who I could see going to Kansas City, veteran receiver, sure hands. I think Odell, you give him somebody like Pat Mahomes, even though he's older and, maybe not quite as explosive as he was. I think he's going to be a consistent veteran target for that Kansas City receiving core if you're able to get him.
Yeah, no, I think if he goes to a team like the Jets, I think that would be perfect for him. Be the number 2 next to Garrett Wilson. He's in New York, which, like you mentioned there, Bakari, he loves New York. So of course, I think two stones with, or whatever the saying is, of course, 2 birds with 1 stone. There we go. But I think that'd be the perfect fit. Amir, do you think he's going to retire, or do you think he finds work elsewhere?
I think it definitely finds work elsewhere. And, I believe this past year, he showed that he still has some sort of ability left. He's still capable. And, I believe Odell, like Bakar just mentioned, he's not trying to chase money. He wants to win. And at this point, the whole long list of injuries, he probably only has a couple years left. And so I believe he's going to either go to one or two places. He's either going to go to New York, to play with the Jets, like you just mentioned, or he's going to go to KC and just win and just ride it out.
Yeah, absolutely. J.K. Dobbins, I think, is another interesting player. Interesting to see where he goes. Of course, talented when he's on the field, but he's battled a lot of injuries. I would like to see Baltimore at least re-sign him on a cheap deal, keep him in an offense where they know him, and when he's healthy, they're going to give him a shot. Otherwise, we might not really see J.K. Dobbins play again. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, some other honorable mentions, and some of these guys definitely could have had a graphic. However, most of these guys, I think, either are going to return, like these Tampa Bay linebackers. I think Devin White is up in the air. We've seen the rumors of Arizona, but Levante is going to return. Za'Darius, as much as, we're going to have to pay him, I think he will be back as a Cleveland Brown. DJ Reader, he's a franchise tag player. He's going to be back in Cincinnati. Patrick Queen, same scenario. He's probably going to be back in Baltimore. But I guess Stephon Gilmore is a guy that we can dive into here. Kyle Duggar's another franchise guy. He's going to be back in New England. Stephon Gilmore, though, a guy that's on his last leg, like we mentioned. This is like his last contract of his career. Where do you guys think he could go? Amir, I'll start with you. I know you like Gilmore. Do you want to see him back in Dallas or on the Cleveland Browns?
Gilmore, was the person I'm really interested in and curious to see. I think that last game of the playoffs, sort of made teams scared to want to pay him. He played terrible. He got absolutely torched and cooked. Like it was like watching a grandpa trying to guard young receivers. And I believe Gilmore, I think he's going to stay in Dallas. And I think Dallas might, still pay him like a 1 or 2 year deal. Or he come to good old Cleveland.
Yeah, no, I think he could be our 4th string cornerback. A good mentor for some of the guys that we have. Bakari, is there someone on this list that intrigues you to come to Cleveland? Or do you want to talk about any of these guys on this list?
In a dream scenario, hey, Devin White, why don't you book your fight to Cleveland, man?
Right.
We got
I'll take it.
on fire. Yeah, who doesn't love that? Come on. Can you imagine JOK and Devin White? Oh man.
Man.
I will throw this out there as Browns fans. Taki's a free agent. We got to figure out what we're gonna do with him. But hopefully that dude doesn't. Taki was solid. Let's not disrespect him, right? But overall, that's gonna do it here. I'm sorry.
He was decent.
Yeah, he was decent. He was blessed. Anyway, we're gonna get off that topic. That's gonna do it here for today's episode. Episode 147 in the books. 150 is right around the corner. It's crazy to say, but with all these, of course, I'm adding in draft podcasts as well, so that number is going to keep going up and up and up. But Amir, of course, you're here every single Thursday. We're recording this a little bit early, but Bakari, you made some time for us this week. And what are your last thoughts here before we get out of here?
I'm back next week. Let's do it.
You're back next week? I mean, hey, next Tuesday, Picard, we're going to be talking about the NBA playoff race. So if you want to hop on there, of course, me and you can do that. But Amir, no, we have some free agency power rankings coming up next week. After that, we might dive into the defensive side of the ball. Or, hey, I mean, we can dive into some NBA podcasts. We're going to figure it out. But Amir, your last thoughts here before we get out of here.
Hey, it's always a blessing to be on this every week.
No, absolutely. Again, if you guys made it this far, obviously you enjoyed at least a little bit. And sorry for the the repetitive Browns mentions, but hey, fan can dream. And Aaron Donald, I heard he's disgruntled. Maybe he finds his way in Cleveland. Anyway, that's going to do it.
I think Pat Mahomes didn't like it in Kansas City no more. If he came to Cleveland, man,
I mean, if Andy Reid retires, why not? I mean, Cleveland, like if you want to prove you're like a legend, do what Tom Brady couldn't. Come win a championship in Cleveland.
Hey, man. All I'm saying is, Bill Belichick and Kevin Stefanski is like neck and neck. You give Kevin Stefanski back.
That's where we end the podcast.
That's the greatest coach of all time.
That's where we end the podcast. Okay. So I'll see you guys next week. Of course, drop a like, subscribe. We're out of here.